From South Carolina Public Radio, this is the South Carolina Lede. I'm your host, Gavin Jackson, and this episode was recorded on September 11th, 2024 from South Carolina Public Radio Studios here in Columbia. On this episode of The Lead, we recap some of the biggest moments from the historic debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Yes, that's it. That's the pod, folks. It's pretty extensive. I gave you some meaty clips in there, but we'll have much more in Saturday's pod about what else happened this week. But stay tuned for a recap of the debate in a moment. The Lead loves hearing from y'all. That's why we have a voicemail box set up at 803-563-7169. Let us know what's happening in your world. If you're an undecided voter, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to give us a shout. Tell us what you're thinking about. I know South Carolina is ruby red, but I want to hear from some undecided voters. Maybe you live in a swing state. Give us a call. 803-563-7169. Are we bored for some election coverage? Maybe. We want to hear some folks talk. We're North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, even Pennsylvania sympathetic.
Go Birds.
Give us a shout. On Tuesday night, in the first time they ever met, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump squared off during a 90-minute debate on ABC News. This debate was a key moment in Harris's whirlwind campaign since the last debate on June 27th between Trump and President Joe Biden, that a month later sunk Biden's re-election bid and catapulted her to the top of the ticket. While no one's campaign ended Tuesday night, Harris, based on polling and reactions from Democrats and Republicans alike, exceeded expectations and effectively and repeatedly baited Trump into tangents full of misinformation and bluster. So let's look at some of those moments now.
Great.
Let's start with the economy. That's how the debate started. And we've previously talked about each candidate's tax plans, but we didn't get as many specifics last night on policy, on really any policy. Here you go.
When I had it, I had tariffs, and yet I had no inflation. Look, we've had a terrible economy because inflation which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. We were at 21%, but that's being generous because many things are 50, 60, 70, and 80% higher than they were just a few years ago. This has been a disaster for people, for the middle class, but for every class. On top of that, we have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums, and they're coming in and they're taking jobs that are occupied right now by African Americans and Hispanics, and also unions. Unions are going to be affected very soon.
Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his economic plan, it's all about tax breaks for the richest people. I am offering what I describe as an opportunity economy, and the best economists in our country, if not the world, have reviewed our relative plans for the future of America. What Goldman Sachs has said is that Donald Trump's plan would make the economy worse, mine would strengthen the economy. What the Wharton School has said is Donald Trump's plan would actually explode the deficit. 16 Nobel laureates have described his economic plan as something that would increase inflation and by the middle of next year would invite a recession.
CNN's Daniel Dale said the network asked the Trump campaign for any evidence of his claim that his proposed across-the-board tariffs wouldn't raise prices for Americans. The campaign responded by sending a study which said prices for Americans would rise when the tariffs were implemented. Democrats are banking on abortion being a major issue to turn out moderate female Republicans and independents in those 7 key swing states, including Pennsylvania, which begins early voting next week, and that's also where the debate was held. Philadelphia.
Go Birds.
Ugh, I had to say it. Now, Trump was asked by ABC's Lindsay Davis whether he would sign a national abortion ban.
I'm not signing a ban, and there's no reason to sign a ban because we've gotten what everybody wanted. Democrats, Republicans, and everybody else, and every legal scholar wanted it to be brought back into the states, and the states are voting. And it may take a little time, but for 52 years, this issue has torn our country apart, and they've wanted it back in the states. And I did something that nobody thought was possible. The states are now voting. What she says is an absolute lie. And as far as the abortion ban, no, I'm not in favor of abortion ban, but it doesn't matter because this issue has now been taken over by the states.
Would you veto a national abortion ban if it came to your desk?
Well, I won't have to because, again, two things. Number one, she said she'll go back to Congress. She'll never get the vote. It's impossible for her to get the vote, especially now with the 50-50 and essentially 50-50 in both Senate and the House. She's not going to get the vote.
Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact. Let's understand how we got here. Donald Trump hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did exactly as he intended. And now in over 20 states, there are Trump abortion bans, which make it criminal for a doctor or nurse to provide health care. In one state, it provides prison for life. Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest, which understand what that means. A survivor of a crime of violation to their body does not have the right to make a decision about what happens to their body next. That is immoral. And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. They don't want that.
Trump has disavowed Project 2025, saying he's never read it. Sticking with healthcare, Harris dug in on Trump's failure to present a replacement plan to the Affordable Care Act after years of supporting efforts to overturn the plan. Here is Trump talking about the ACA.
It's still never going to be great, and it's too expensive for people. And what we will do is we're looking at different plans. If we can come up with a plan that's going to cost our people, our population, less money and be better health care than Obamacare, then I would absolutely do it. But until then, I'd run it as good as it can be run.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan. I'm not president right now.
As it relates to the Affordable Care Act, understand, just look at the history to know where people stand. When Donald Trump was president, 60 times he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. 60 times. I was a senator at the time when I will never forget the early morning hours when it was up for a vote in the United States Senate. And the late, great John McCain, who you have disparaged as being, you don't like him, you said, at the time because he got caught. He was an American hero. The late, great John McCain, I will never forget that night, walked onto the Senate floor and said, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't get rid of the Affordable Care Act. You have no plan. And what the Affordable Care Act has done is eliminate the ability of insurance companies to deny people with pre-existing conditions. I don't have to tell the people watching tonight, you remember what that was like?
Immigration is a top-of-mind issue for many of Americans, even those not in border states, due to the massive influx of illegal immigrants over the years due to a broken immigration system. While Trump blamed Harris and Biden for this, though illegal crossings have substantially dropped since the Biden administration imposed tougher asylum restrictions. That, of course, was following record-high illegal immigration, though. Harris did note that Trump effectively killed the biggest bipartisan attempt to at least try and fix the problem the first time in decades.
So I'm the only person on this stage who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations for the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings. And let me say that the United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, came up with a border security bill, which I supported. And that bill would have put 1,500 more border agents on the border to help those folks who are working there right now overtime, trying to do their job. It would have allowed us to stem the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States. I know there are so many families watching tonight who have been personally affected by the surge of fentanyl in our country. That bill would have put more resources to allow us to prosecute transnational criminal organizations for trafficking in guns, drugs, and human beings. But you know what happened to that bill? Donald Trump called up some folks in Congress and said, kill the bill. And you know why? Because he'd prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And I'll tell you something, he's going to talk about immigration a lot tonight, even when it's not the subject that is being raised. And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back. Our country is being lost. We're a failing nation. And it happened 3.5 years ago. And what's going on here, you're going to end up in World War III, just to go into another subject. What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame. As far as rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is
the people on television say my dog was taken and used for food.
That was one of the more bizarre moments and biggest moments of the night for Harris baiting Trump, and then him going in on a debunked false statement about Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, eating people's pets. This false claim has also been amplified by Trump's running mate and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, who tweeted in part that his office had received inquiries from Springfield residents, quote, who've said their neighbors' pets or local wildlife were abducted by Haitian migrants. It's possible, of course, that all of these rumors will turn out to be false. Quote, they were false, based on all the officials in Springfield, Ohio. To another point, I can attest, however, that people do leave Trump rallies early, including some elected officials. I saw this most recently at the Republican National Convention. Harris is not paying or busing people to attend her rallies like Trump claimed. Looking at foreign affairs, Trump would not commit to saying he wants a Ukrainian victory over Russia, which invaded the sovereign democracy more than 2 years ago. The move was another opportunity for Harris to hammer Trump on his affection for dictators. This was what he said when David Muir asked him if he wants Ukraine to win the war.
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers. Look, we're in for $250 billion or more, because they don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done than we are. They're in for $150 billion less because Biden and you don't have the courage to ask Europe like I did with NATO. They paid billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars when I said, either you pay up or we're not going to protect you anymore. So that's maybe one of the reasons they don't like me as much as they like weak people. But you take a look at what's happening. We're in for 250 to 275 billion. They're into 100 to 150. They should be forced to equalize. With that being said, I want to get the war settled. I know Zelensky very well, and I know Putin very well. I have a good relationship, and they respect your president, okay? They respect me. They don't respect Biden. How would you respect him? Why? For what reason? He hasn't even made a phone call in 2 years to Putin, hasn't spoken to anybody. They don't even try and get it.
Just to clarify in the question, do you believe it's in the U.S. best interest for Ukraine to win this war, yes or no?
I think it's the U.S. best interest to get this war finished and just get it done.
All right.
Negotiate a deal, because we have to stop all of these human lives from being destroyed.
Understand why the European allies and our NATO allies are so thankful that you are no longer president, and that we understand the importance of the greatest military alliance the world has ever known, which is NATO, and what we have done to preserve the ability of Zelensky and the Ukrainians to fight for their independence. Otherwise, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
That move right there by Harris made an international war a continent away relevant to voting Americans in one of the most critical swing states. That was the difference in that answer and many answers on the stage last night. Harris also slammed Trump over his Afghanistan deal that he negotiated with the Taliban, while not saying whether she agreed with how the pullout was done.
Well, I will tell you, I agreed with President Biden's decision to pull out of Afghanistan. 4 presidents said they would, and Joe Biden did. And as a result, America's taxpayers are not paying the $300 million a day we were paying for that endless war. And as of today, there is not one member of the United States military who is in active duty in a combat zone in any war zone around the world, the first time this century. But let's understand how we got to where we are. Donald Trump, when he was president, negotiated one of the weakest deals you can imagine. He calls himself a deal maker. Even his national security advisor said it was a weak, terrible deal. And here's how it went down. He bypassed the Afghan government. He negotiated directly with a terrorist organization called the Taliban. The negotiation involved the Taliban getting 5,000 Taliban terrorists released. And get this. And the president at the time invited the Taliban to Camp David, a place of storied significance for us as Americans, a place where we honor the importance of American diplomacy, where we invite and receive respected world leaders. And this former president, as president, invited them to Camp David because he does not again appreciate the role and responsibility of the President of the United States to be commander-in-chief with a level of respect. And this gets back to the point of how he has consistently disparaged and demeaned members of our military, fallen soldiers, and the work that we must do to uphold the strength and the respect of the United States of America around the world.
If you take a look at that period of time, the Taliban was killing our soldiers, a lot of them, with snipers. And I got involved with the Taliban because the Taliban was doing the killing. That's the fighting force within Afghanistan. They don't bother doing that because, they deal with the wrong people all the time. But I got involved. And Abdul is the head of the Taliban. He is still the head of the Taliban. And I told Abdul, don't do it anymore. You do it anymore, you're going to have problems. And he said, why do you send me a picture of my house? I said, you're going to have to figure that out, Abdul. And for 18 months, we had nobody killed. We did have an agreement negotiated by Mike Pompeo. It was a very good agreement. The reason it was good, we were getting out. We would have been out faster than them, but we wouldn't have lost the soldiers. We wouldn't have left many Americans behind, and we wouldn't have left $85 billion worth of brand new, beautiful military equipment behind. And just to finish, they blew it. The agreement said you have to do this, and they didn't do it. The agreement was terminated by us because they didn't do what they were supposed to do.
A fact check there that it was not $85 billion worth of equipment left behind, more like $7 billion. It's unclear who Trump was referring to when he was talking about Abdul, but he was likely referring to one of the Taliban's negotiators with the United States, Abdul Ghani Baradar. He was not and is not the leader of the Taliban. Also, Trump continued to deny that he lost the 2020 election, despite recent comments that he characterized as sarcastic. He also denied any responsibility for January 6th, despite being the commander-in-chief at the time. And as we move out of this, just a fact check, the moderators did call out Trump while talking about abortion, like you heard, for saying babies were being murdered after they were born. That's not true. They corrected Trump on crime stats, and they fact-checked him when he repeated lies about that 2020 election and the dog eating. Again, the moderators weren't overly fact-checking him. That's what the other candidate is supposed to do. These were just some of the most egregious statements that were quickly refuted to hamper disinformation. CNN's Daniel Dale said that Trump told at least 33 lies, while Harris said one, in addition to a few misleading and/or needed context statements. In fact, Trump was given more time by running over the moderators. According to MSNBC, he spoke for 43 minutes and 3 seconds, while Harris spoke for 37 minutes and 41 seconds. For a more thorough fact check of the debate, visit PolitiFact.com. Will there be another debate? Vice President Harris wants one. Donald Trump? TBD. But the biggest news of the night, in an Instagram post to her 20 million followers after the debate, international superstar Taylor Swift wrote in part, quote, "Like many of you, I watched the debate tonight. I will be casting my vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the 2024 presidential election. I'm voting for Kamala Harris because she fights for the rights and causes I believe need a warrior to champion them," quote. Swift was holding a cat in a photo on her post and signed it, quote, "With love and hope, Taylor Swift, childless cat lady," quote. Now, this pod has gone on for too long, I know, so I'm going to save some voices and interviews from the watch party I was at for our Saturday pod, and we have a lot more information that we need to get to as well. But, a quick reaction vibe check for you in the form of a poll. Data! From pollster Robert Cahaley of the Trafalgar Group, he surveyed 2,245 likely general election voters in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, all of our favorite swing states and vacation destinations. This poll found that Trump and Harris support was tied before the debate at 47%, with 4% of folks being undecided. When asked afterwards who won the debate, 55% said Harris and 43% said Trump, with 2% undecided. Then, the final question. Respondents were asked who they were voting for now, and wouldn't you know it, they were tied up again at 48%. There was a margin of error of 2.1%. And folks, the pod, like I said, has gone long. We don't want to take up too much more of your time. We were already late. We try to get the debate moved. But we're going to forego the wind down section, save it for you on Saturday. We got some calls we're going to get to. So tune in then. And again, much more news in Saturday's pod. Thank you as always for listening. You can always show us your appreciation by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or a voicemail at 803-563-7169. And you can stay updated with the latest news on scetv.org and southcarolinapublicradio.org. And don't forget to support your local newspapers. The South Carolina Lede is a production of South Carolina Public Radio. Our producer is A.T. Shire. Amy Crouch is our supervising producer. Sean Birch is our executive producer. This podcast is produced with support from PRX and is made possible in part by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, as well as listener contributions to the ETV Endowment of South Carolina. For the South Carolina Lede, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina.
I was here. Okay, bye.
It's winking. I think it's winking at me.